You know, there are some stories that are just, they're stories, and then there are a few that are something else entirely. We're not just talking about a bestseller or a summer blockbuster.
No, not at all.
We are talking about the bedrock. I mean, the absolute narrative infrastructure that pretty much the entire Western canon is built on top of.
You are, of course, talking about the Odyssey.
I am. And usually when we talk about Homer's The Odyssey, we're in, like, a classroom setting.
Right. It's academic.
Totally. We're talking about dactylic hexameter, or we're looking at maps of the Mediterranean. It's academic. But right now, in the year 2026, we are not in a classroom. We are in a war zone.
It really has turned into a battlefield, hasn't it? And it's fascinating because the ammunition being used isn't, new archaeological evidence or some lost translation.
No.
It's casting announcements.
Exactly. Picture this for a second. You take Christopher Nolan, a man who I think we can both agree is a titan. He's maybe the last director out there who can literally do whatever he wants.
The man who made nuclear physics into a billion-dollar thriller. I mean, come on.
Right. So you take him and you hand him the foundational text of Western literature. You give him a rumored budget that probably rivals the GDP of a small island nation. And then, just to light the fuse, you drop a cast list that honestly reads like a hallucination of Hollywood royalty.
It's an insane list.
And you center it all around a controversy that has the internet absolutely, positively losing its collective mind.
It is the perfect storm. You've got this auteur theory of filmmaking colliding head-on with the modern culture war's obsession with identity and representation.
Mm-hmm.
And sitting right in the middle of this whole thing is a poem that is 2,800 years old.
So here is the mission for this deep dive. We are not just going to rattle off the famous names, although we definitely have to do that because, frankly, the list is wild.
We have to.
We need to unpack why this specific project has triggered such a primal, visceral. We need to look at the mission impossible task of adapting a myth, specific and very heated debate around Helen of Troy, and honestly, the survival strategies that actors are now using to navigate this kind of back.
And we really have to dig into that central question of fidelity. What does it even mean to be faithful to a myth? Is it about the spirit of the story, or is it about the literal word-for-word descriptions in the text?
Because that is exactly where the battle lines are being drawn.
That's the whole game right there.
And we're going to talk about something called the Jacob Allure, which might just be the smartest PR move I've ever. But let's start at the beginning. The hook. The rumors started swirling around November, mostly coming out of GQ and a few leak accounts that Nolan was taking on the Odyssey.
And initially, I think a lot of us just sort of brushed it off.
I certainly did. It sounded like a rage bait, or, one of those fan-made posters you see on Facebook where they cast Henry Cavill as literally everyone.
Right. It felt too big, too on the nose. Christopher Nolan does the Odyssey. But the reporting, it persisted. GQ put out some very specific details, and suddenly the conversation shifted from, is this real, to, oh my God, look at who is in this thing.
It's being called the Avengers of Greek mythology.
Which is an apt comparison, but I think it actually undersells it in a way.
Yeah.
The Avengers built its cast up over, 5, 6 movies?
Decade, yeah.
This is just dropping an entire galaxy of stars into a single film all at once. And that brings its own set of problems, which I think we should probably get into.
Okay, let's break down the heavy hitters. At the center of this whole labyrinth, we have Odysseus himself, and the name on the sheet is Matt Damon.
Which, if you really stop and think about it, is a very Nolan choice.
How so? What do you mean by that?
Well, just look at the Nolan archetype. You've got Cooper in Interstellar, you've got Oppenheimer, even his Bruce Wayne. These are men who are, they're burdened, they are capable, they are incredibly intelligent, but they are exhausted.
Yes, exhausted is the perfect word.
They're carrying the weight of the world, or in this case, the weight of a 10-year war and a brutal 10-year journey home.
Matt Damon does tired but competent better than almost anyone in the business.
Exactly. He has that The Martian energy, that sort of, okay, I am in a terrible situation, the universe is actively trying to kill me, but I'm going to science and fight my way out of this.
And that is
Odysseus. He's the man of twists and turns. So Damon, he anchors the film in this very reliable, grounded reality.
But then we have to look at the next generation. His son, Telemachus, the boy who has to grow up waiting for a father. And for that role, we have Tom Holland.
Spider-Man himself.
Now, I have to ask you, does this work for you? Because I like Tom Holland. He's charismatic, he's charming. But when I see him, I have a really, really hard time ancient Greek prince.
You don't see it.
I just see Peter Parker in a toga.
And you've just hit on a crucial point, and something the source has brought up again and again, this idea of casting fatigue. When you cast someone with that level of global recognition, someone who is so specifically attached to a massive franchise, you are fighting an uphill battle against the audience's memory from minute one.
It's the distraction factor. It pulls you out of the movie.
It does. In film theory, right?
Yeah.
You want the actor to disappear into the role.
Yeah.
But when the actor is Tom Holland, the audience spends the first 20 minutes just going, oh, look, Spider-Man is wearing a tunic.
Yeah, that's it.
It breaks the immersion. And a story like The Odyssey, it relies so heavily on immersion. It needs to feel ancient and strange and distant.
And that risk is doubled, maybe even tripled with the next casting choice. Let's talk about Athena.
The goddess of wisdom, a pivotal role.
Absolutely. Now, originally, the rumors and all the early outrage was centered on Zendaya playing Helen of Troy. But the updated reports are now saying she is actually cast as Athena, and yet critics are still unhappy.
They are. The source material is pretty blunt about this. One commentator just called it
Why, though? She's an incredible actress. She has Emmys. She's proven her talent over and over.
It's not a question of talent at all. Nobody's debating that. It's a question of overexposure. Just think about the last 2 years. You've had Dune, you've had Spider-Man, Challenger, Euphoria. Zendaya is literally everywhere.
She's on every magazine cover, every red carpet, every ad campaign.
So it's the same problem you just mentioned with Tom Holland, but on steroids. The argument is that she has become bigger than any role she... If the goddess Athena appears in a cloud of glory and it's Zendaya, does the audience feel awe for a deity? Or do they just feel like they're watching a really expensive perfume?
That's a brutal but fair.
And the critics argue that for a deity, you need someone with a bit more mystery, or at least someone we haven't seen every single week for the last...
It's that Jennifer Lawrence circa 2014 problem.
Exactly. That is the perfect analogy. When you become the it girl, you lose the ability to be a character actor. And Athena, for all her power, is a character role.
We've also got a few other names here that, to me, fit the Nolan aesthetic perfect. John Bernthal as King Menelaus.
Which is just brilliant casting. Menelaus is the aggrieved husband. He's a warrior king, but he's not exactly the sharpest tool in the shed compared to Odysseus.
Right.
Bernthal has that raw physical intensity. He can play that simmering rage better than almost anyone working today.
And Robert Pattinson is Antineus. He's the head suitor, the main bad guy trying to steal Penelope and kill.
Pattinson is fantastic at playing slimy, arrogant, yet weirdly charming villain. If you think about his role in The King, or even some of his earlier indie work, he can bring a real palpable menace to those dinner tables.
And then there's Anne Hathaway as Penelope.
Another Nolan veteran. She was Catwoman. She was in Interstellar. She brings a certain regality and intelligence. And Penelope is a character of immense patience and cunning. Hathaway can definitely pull that.
And then rounding it out, we have John Leguizamo listed as Eurymachus, Mia Goth as Melantho.
Which is terrifying.
Terrifying is right. Mia Goth can do Unhinged like nobody else. And then we have Elliot Page in an undisclosed role.
It is a stacked deck, an absolutely stacked deck. But again, the question remains, does the sheer weight of all these famous names crush the story itself? That's the artistic risk Nolan is taking here.
But that risk, as big as it is, it pales in comparison to the cultural risk he's taking with one specific character. Okay, I guess we have to do it. We have to walk straight into the fire. Let's talk about Helen.
Yeah.
So the rumor mill has pretty much solidified on this one. It's not Zendaya. The report is that Lupita Nyong'o has been cast as Helen of Troy.
And this has sparked a debate that goes so far beyond fan casting. This has turned into a referendum on source material, on history, and on the very definition of adaptation.
The backlash was immediate. And it wasn't just, oh, I don't like this choice. It was very, very specific.
It was. And to really understand the criticism, you have to look at the text. The critics aren't just saying, well, I imagined her as white. They are going back to the source. They are citing Homer directly.
They're bringing receipts.
They're literally bringing receipts from 800 BC. In the Iliad and the Odyssey, Helen is described with very specific recurring phrases. And the most famous one is white-armed.
White-armed Helen. It's almost part of her name.
Exact. And she's also described as fair-haired, having golden curls, and a fair complexion.
Now, I want to push on this a little bit because often when people hear white-armed, they think, okay, that's just an adjective. It's like saying tall Helen or angry Helen. But in Homeric poetry, it's much more than that.
It is. And this is where the deep dive context really matters. These poems, the Iliad and the Odyssey, they were oral tradition for centuries before they were ever written down.
Right. They were performed.
They were performed by bards. And to memorize thousands and thousands of lines of verse, these bards used a system of formulas.
Like mnemonic.
Exactly. A specific character would have a specific epithet that fit the rhythm, the meter of the line. Swift-footed Achilles, gray-eyed Athena, white-armed Helen. These weren't just throwaway descriptions. They were the structural pillars of the character's identity in the poem. They were repeated over and over and over again.
So for the purists, the textual literalists changing white-armed to a black actress isn't just a casting choice. It's like deleting a fundamental piece of the source code.
That is precisely their argument. They view that physical description as a canon fact, just as immutable as the fact that Troy has walls or that Odysseus has a ship. They argue that Homer defined the archetype of beauty for that specific culture, and that definition explicitly included white arms, and golden hair.
So to cast Lupita Nyong'o, in their view, is to actively contradict the author's explicit instructions.
It's a direct contradiction. That's the core of the complaint.
And it's not just about there's a visual component to how this backlash is playing out online. The sources we looked at mentioned the specific images.
This is a classic, if cynical, example of framing the narrative. When critics on Twitter or YouTube complain about this cast, they are not using a photo of Lupita from the Oscars where she looks like a literal goddess in that blue Prada gown.
Which she did. That was an iconic look, one of the best of the decade.
True, but they aren't using that photo. They are consistently circulating a still image of her from the film 12 Years a Slave,
where she plays Patsy, an enslaved woman who is being abused, starved, and is in constant, unimaginable distress.
Exactly. She's not styled to be the most beautiful woman in the world in that frame. She is styled to be a victim of horrific brutality, and the supporters of the casting argue that this is incredibly dishonest. It's a deliberate visual bias.
They're purposefully picking an image that makes her look as far removed from a glamorous Greek queen as possible, just to fuel the outrage.
Precisely. They are manipulating the aesthetic to make the casting seem more jarring than it might actually be on screen. And what's interesting is that even the critics and the sources we reviewed, people who hate this casting choice, they still had to admit that Lupita is a spectacular actress and objectively beautiful.
But they always fall back on the accuracy argument.
They always retreat to, but it's not accurate to the text.
And the internet, as it always does, has just turned this whole thing into a meme factory. The nicknames are, well, they're creative, I'll give them that, but they're brutal.
They are deeply derogatory.
Yeah.
Helen of Detroit, Felon of Troy.
Ooh, that's rough.
And they've taken the most famous line ever written about Helen, the face that launched 1,000 ships, and just looked at it. Now it's the face that launched 1,000 simps, or the face that launched 1,000 shitposts.
Which just shows you how quickly the veneer of literary debate falls away and it just becomes straight up mockery.
It really does. But we have to steelman the other side of this. We have to look at the defense being mounted. Usually when this happens, like with The Little Mermaid or the new Snow White, the defense is pretty simple. It's fiction. It's a made-up story about made-up people. Why does race matter?
It's just a movie. Relax.
Right. But the sources we're analyzing argue that in this specific case, that defense is obtuse.
Obtuse? In what way?
Because it willfully ignores the internal logic of the world building. And this leads us directly to the swan analogy. Did you see this in the notes?
I did, and I have to admit, I had to read it twice.
Walk us through the swan defense.
It's a very specific argument you see popping up in the comment sections online. It goes like this. In the original myths, Helen's mother, Leda, was impregnated by the god Zeus. But Zeus wasn't in human form at the time. He had transformed himself into a swan.
Okay, standard Greek mythology weirdness.
Got it.
So Leda then lays an egg, and Helen hatches from this egg. The argument from the procasting side is essentially, you are willing to accept a woman hatching from a swan egg laid by a god, but you draw the line at her being black. That's the weird part for you.
Put that way, it does highlight the absurdity of demanding strict realism in a story about monsters and magic and gods turning into animals.
It does. It directly attacks the realism argument, but then the lore argument pushes back. The counter-rebuttal is that all fantasy worlds, even the most magical ones, still have rules.
Right. Just because there's magic doesn't mean anything goes. There has to be consistency.
Exactly. If the book says the sky on this fantasy planet is green and the movie makes it blue, you've broken the lore. If the book says Helen has white arm, regardless of the whole swan business, then she should have white arms. They argue that suspension of disbelief is for the magic parts, not for ignoring the established physical descriptions of the human characters.
It's the consistency test. And this is where the comparison to Black Panther comes. This was a really fascinating point in this.
I thought so too. It's probably the strongest argument that critics have when it comes to the double standard. When Black Panther was being cast, and even now when fans discuss characters like Storm from the X-Men, the fan base is incredibly particular about skin tone.
They care about the specific shade, not just that the character is black.
Absolutely. There are intense debates online about colorism. If an actor is perceived as being too light-skinned to play a proud African king, for example, the fans will often reject it because it feels inauthentic to the character's heritage and identity.
So the critics of the Helen casting are turning that around and ask, if it's valid to demand specific skin tones for T'Challa to preserve his cultural identity, why is it suddenly racist or obtuse to demand specific physical traits for Helen to preserve hers?
That is the absolute core of the friction. They are asking for a universal standard of fidelity. If culture and appearance matter for one group's fictional heroes, they should matter for all groups' fictional heroes.
And it's not like they haven't complained about white women playing Helen before. The source brought up the 2004 Troy.
The Brad Pitt one, yeah.
Right. Diane Kruger played Helen in that. She's German. She's blonde. She has blue eyes. She is, by any definition, white-armed.
And yet, even back in 2004, people complained that she wasn't Greek enough.
Really? I don't remember that.
Oh, yeah. They said she looked too Germanic, Too modern. So it suggests that for this specific character, Helen, the audience has always been hypercritical. She is the ultimate symbol of beauty, and everyone has a different, fiercely held idea of what that looks like.
So no matter who you cast, you are fighting a losing battle against the imagination of the audience.
It seems that way.
Okay, so we've got the cast, we've got the controversy, but we need to look at the man behind the curtain here, Christopher Nolan. This is not a guy who does things by accident.
Never. Every single frame is calculated.
And Nolan has a history with casting that hasn't always been, well, diverse.
Like putting it very mildly.
Yeah.
There's a famous honest trailer on YouTube that jokes about Nolan's movies featuring mostly white, mostly male protagonists who spend the whole movie explaining things to each other in hallways.
It's funny because it's true, though. You look at The Prestige, Inception, Dunkirk, it's a lot of very serious white guys in suits or uniforms.
It is, and for years, critics have pointed this out. So there is very strong speculation that this Avengers level of diversity with Lupita, Zendaya, John Leguizamo is Nolan's direct response to that criticism.
Do you think he's overcorrecting?
Or is he just evolving? The source material mentions that casting John David Washington as the lead in Tenet was really the first big step. I mean, his character was literally named the protagonist.
That's true. It was a statement.
It was a huge statement. And now, taking the oldest, most foundational story in Western history and filling it with a truly global cast, feels like he's planting a flag.
But the source makes a key distinction here. They argue that Nolan has a kind of leeway that other directors don't get.
The merit versus quota argument.
Exactly. Because often when we see diverse casting in reboots, people immediately scream DEI hire, or they're just filling a quota. But with Nolan,
he casts heavyweights. He isn't casting random influencers to check a box. He's casting Academy Award winners and nominees. The comparison the source used, which I think is perfect, is Samuel L. Jackson as Nick Fury.
Oh, that's the perfect example. Because Nick Fury in the original comics was a white guy, a gruff, cigar-chomping WWII vet with gray temples.
For decades, he was played by David Hasselhoff in a terrible TV movie. But then they cast Samuel L. Jackson in Iron Man, and nobody complained.
Well, a few people complained online, I'm sure, but then they saw him on screen.
Exactly, because Samuel L. Jackson is just undeniable. He has so much charisma, so much gravity, that he simply became Nick Fury. The performance completely overwrote the original canon, and the source suggests Nolan is betting on the same thing here. He's betting that Lupita Nyong'o is such a powerhouse that 5 minutes into the movie, you won't care about the white-armed epithet. You'll just be captivated by her performance.
But there is a flip side to this whole industry conversation. We talked about the double standard for the characters, but what about for the actors themselves? The source brought up the story of Odessa.
Yeah, this is a really messy, uncomfortable part of how the industry works right now. So Odessa A'zion is a rising actress. She was cast in a movie to play a character who was explicitly written as being both Mexican and Jewish, and Odessa is not.
And the internet did what the internet does.
They attacked her immediately. They accused her of taking a role that didn't belong to her, of erasing the identity of the character, and ultimately she stepped down. She quit the movie.
She gave up the job. She gave up the paycheck.
She did. And the source we analyzed was absolutely furious about this.
Furious
at the situation, but yes, also very critical of her choice. They called it a weak.
Wow. Weakness is a strong word.
It is. Their argument is that an actor's job is to act, to pretend, to embody someone else. And by stepping down, she bent the knee to an online mob. The source argues that white actors or non-minority actors are increasingly expected to sacrifice their careers on the altar of authentic representation. But when the situation is reversed, when a black actress plays a historically white character, the industry circles the wagons and protects them with the "it's just acting" defense.
So it's the asymmetry of the rules. One side is told to stay in their lane, the other side is told the lanes don't exist.
That is the perception. And that perception is what fuels so much of the resentment. It makes a lot of people feel like the game is rigged.
So if the game is rigged, or at least incredibly dangerous to play, how do you play it? If you are an actor in 2026 and you get that phone call from Christopher Nolan and he says, "I want you to be Helen of Troy," you say yes. Of course you say yes.
Of course.
But then the backlash hit. What do you do?
Well, according to our analysis, there is one strategy that actually seems to work. We're calling it the Jacob Elordi method.
I love this. Teach us the method.
So Jacob Elordi, tall, white, Australian actor, was recently cast as Heathcliff in Emerald Fennell's new adaptation of Wuthering Heights. Now, if you know the book, Heathcliff is explicitly described as dark-skinned, a Lascar, a gypsy. He's an outsider. His otherness, his race, is a huge part of why he is ostracized by the other characters.
So casting a conventionally handsome white guy is a direct violation of the text's core theme.
It is. A major one. And people were angry. There were articles, there were tweets, there were long TikTok video essays about it. But what did Jacob Elordi do?
Did he issue an apology? Did he post a long note on Instagram about his process?
He did absolute nothing.
Nothing.
Total radio silence. He didn't post. He didn't do an interview explaining his deep connection to the character. He just went to work. And because he refused to feed the beast starved.
The controversy just ran out of gas.
It completely did. The news cycle moved on to the next outrage.
Yeah.
And this is the lesson. Controversy needs oxygen. And the oxygen is the reaction. The moment you acknowledge the backlash, you validate it and give it more power.
But, and this is a big but, the source points out that this method is a luxury that not every actor has.
The interview trap.
Right. It's a lot easier for Jacob Elordi to stay silent than it is.
Exactly. Because of how the media operates. When Jacob Elordi goes on a press tour for this movie, reporters will ask him, what was it like working with Margot Robbie? Or how did you get into character?
Softball. Standard question.
But when a minority actor takes on a controversial role, the press weaponizes it against. The very first question Lupita will get in every single interview. What does it mean to you to be the first Black Helen of Troy? Or what is your message to the trolls who are angry about your casting?
They force her to become an activist.
They do. They force her to have an opinion, to take a stand. If she answers, she keeps the controversy alive for another news cycle. If she gets angry, they'll say she's difficult. If she dismisses the question, they'll say she's arrogant. It is a no-win situation. It's a trap designed to generate clicks at her expense.
So white actors just get to be actors, and minority actors have to be representatives for their entire community.
That's what it boils down to. And that makes the Jacob Elordi method of silence very, very hard to execute. But the advice from the source for the cast of the Odyssey remains the same. They used what they called the snake analysis. Imagine for a moment that they rebooted Harry Potter and cast a Black actor to play Severus Snape. The advice for that actor is, do not talk about race. Do not talk about modernizing the story for a new generation.
Just say, Alan Rickman was a legend, and I'm honored and humbled to wear the robe.
Exactly. Pivot to the craft. Praise your predecessor. And ignore the bait. Whether the media will actually allow Lupita to do that is another question entirely.
Before we wrap this all up, there was one voice in the sources that really threw. It was Andrew Klavan.
Ah, yes, the curveball.
So for context, if you don't know, Andrew Klavan is a very prominent conservative commentator. He's usually the guy leading the charge against what he calls woke Hollywood. He generally hates colorblind casting. He feels lectured by the...
You would expect him to be the five-star general of the anti-Lupita army.
Exactly. I was fully expecting him to just tear this casting decision to shreds, but he didn't. He actually defended her.
He did. And his reasoning was, well, it was pleasantly simple, if a bit shallow.
He called her a babe.
The certified babe defense. It's a new one.
He literally said she's a spectacular actress and she's a babe. That was his whole argument.
The source we looked at found this hilarious, but it actually touches on something very real. Klavan basically said, look, I hate the politics, I hate the lecture, but she is so gorgeous and so talented that I'm just going to watch the movie.
It's the babe stamp of approval overriding the political ideology.
It proves that at the end of the day, cinema is a visual medium, and if the actor has enough charisma, they're just magnetic to look at. The audience will forgive a lot of perceived inaccuracy. Beauty is a kind of superpower that can cut right through the culture war.
It's the Samuel L. Jackson effect all over again. If you're cool enough or beautiful enough, the rules just don't apply to you in the same way.
Which is a cynical but probably very accurate summary of how Hollywood works.
So let's zoom out. We have a director who is a titan in the industry. We have a cast that is so famous it's almost blinding. And we have a controversy that is digging up 3,000-year-old poetry to fight very modern political battles.
And we have a release date that is probably years away.
Yeah.
This fight is just getting started.
What does this all mean? Why are we so completely obsessed?
I think it tells us that we're in a kind of crisis of ownership. Who owns the Odyssey? Does it belong to Homer? Does it belong to the historians and academics? Does it belong to Christopher Nolan because he's the one making the movie? Or does it belong to the audience who has imagined these characters in a certain way for centuries?
It's a custody battle for our own myth.
It is. And frankly, I think it's a battle about whether we can ever just watch a movie.
That's the sad part of it, isn't it?
It really is. We claim we want the best actor for the job. That's the line everyone uses. Just hire the best person. But when a director does that, if that best person doesn't match the mental image we have in our head, we explode.
And the media cycle then ensures that by the time we actually sit down in the theater, we aren't thinking about the plot or the cinematography. We're thinking about the tool.
We are pre-exhausted by the discourse before the opening credits even roll.
So I want to leave you, the listener, with this thought. A final provocation. If the Jacob Elordi method, the method of completely ignoring the audience and the outrage, is the only way for art to survive this climate, what does that say about us?
It says we might be the problem.
And does the specific description of white arms in a poem from 800 BC matter more than the living, breathing charisma of the human being saying the lines in 2020.
That is the big gamble that Nolan is taking. He's betting that once the lights go down, the poetry of the performance will ultimately outweigh the poetry of the original text.
I guess we'll find out, and until then, maybe stay out of the comments section, or don't. It's pretty entertaining in a terrifying kind of way. Thanks for diving in with us.
See you next time.